Hi there, my name is Sir Tomaszewski, and I'm going to be going through the thesis and counter-thesis on why I think that Louis Riel's trial was not conducted fairly. So with our two viewpoints, we have our antithesis, which is that Louis Riel's trial was conducted according to the law and the verdict was reached fairly. And then we have our thesis that I believe in, which is that Louis Riel's trial was stacked against him and the verdict was politically motivated or meddled with in some way. So starting off mainly with our counter thesis. So Louis Riel did have a trial, which we saw as in documents of Louis Riel's trial. He was granted to a trial and access to lawyers who did end up defending him, and they made him plead insanity, which could be true, could not. But it's all documented and filed in larger museums and other things like that. All the proceedings were public and transparent, so anybody could go and see the court sessions, which does kind of give a feeling of there being some sort of fairness and openness within the government and the people that were there. And then alternatively, in the views of the government and in the eyes of them, Louis Riel had broken the law. So in the eyes of the government, Louis Riel had staged a high-level organized attack against the government, and it was the duty of those who were in power at the time to ensure that he was persecuted for treason. A lot of this comes from he made direct attacks on Canada. He fought directly with law enforcement, and he threatened and organized for outside people, such as the Germans from the States, to invade, and I put that in air quotations, to invade the Maritimes and the easternmost provinces. And then for our thesis, I have that Louis Riel's speech to the jury kind of showed that the issues that he was facing and how the trial ended up going down was unconstitutional and unjust. The government was meddling, and there was an improper trial system. So the government and MacDonald both stood greatly to gain a great deal from English voters if they could remove Riel. As well, Riel's trial was held in a military court rather than a regular court, which would usually lead to higher chance of conviction and a higher chance of the death penalty. And then biased jury. All six of the jurors for his trial were white English Protestant men who were very obviously biased and aggressive towards the French-speaking Métis man. So then going into our tentative judgment sort of part, I personally believe in my own mind that the viewpoint of an unfair trial is definitely the most accurate. After looking over everything, you can kind of see that there was definitely some sort of meddling, or at least a little bit of what you would say is like politically stacking it. I think that the best way to revise what I said before in our thesis is that Louis Riel's trial was meddled with and tampered in ways that stacked the odds and verdict against him for political and racist gain. So then kind of going into the factual testing, for the side that says that it was fair, Louis Riel was provided a trial and it was public. However, what went on in the background and the political pressure of those on the case can't really be seen, and it's not overly documented. Louis Riel did seem to break the law. However, the actions of the government were also not constitutional, and this could be just as easily be brought to court. Louis Riel had asked multiple times for access to the government and stuff like that, and unfortunately, they did not give it to him. And then for our thesis side, in the trial, Riel claims insanity for his cause, the rebellion. However, in his speeches towards the jury, he has multiple instances where he asks the jury not to take what he is saying as insanity, showing that he's fully in a right mind. and there's no evidence that explicitly shows that any or all government entities had any say in the trial, while it is heavily believed the evidence for it cannot be made. So then kind of in my synthesis, I believe that both sides of the argument can be partially or potentially true. While Louis Riel did have a real trial with lawyers and probable cause for being tried, his trial also could have very easily been meddled with and been used as a political angle. For example, following the defeat of the Red River rebels, many Protestants felt more inclined to violence and bias towards the Métis. This made for the removal and labeling of the indigenous and Métis people much easier for the government, and made it very easy for segregation and assimilation to work. Prominent would be the residential schools. However, on the other hand of that, these could have been totally natural in cause, and this trial could have had nothing to do with any of that sort of thing. Louis Riel, in the eyes of the government, was a traitor. He directly stood against the Canadian government and created, by force, his own government system on Canadian soil. This is very solid and probable cause for arrest, and if anyone were to do that today, they would also be arrested. As such, the title of traitor, I feel, sort of accurately represents what went on. The definition of a traitor is one who betrays one friend, nation, or principle, and unfortunately, Louis Riel did betray his country. However, what he also did was stood up for his people and was a martyr for the Métis to rally behind. In calling him a traitor, however, it makes him sound as if what he was doing was in the best interest of only himself, but what he was doing was bringing the Métis and Indigenous people a voice to the table that was repeatedly ignored. Overall, what I think needs to be stressed is that the truth is somewhere in the middle. While I do not believe that Louis Riel's trial was entirely fair, I also do not believe that the government or anybody was absolutely trying by every means to take Riel down. Unfortunately, while what Riel did was noble, most Protestants and people who were pro-Canada would have seen this as a treason and would not have liked what he had done. So yeah, that's about all I've got. Thank you.